Hi everyone, and good morning. I'm Steve, and I'm a software engineer in Cellusys. This is Dan, CTO, and Charles is our product manager. Today, I'm going to talk about our solution for roaming testing and service launch, which is called RoamBot. Sorry about that. So, what is RoamBot? RoamBot is a global centralized platform that leverages standardized APIs in order to automate roaming testing and service launch. So doing this enables testing of roaming independent of a partner network. So if they have scarcity of resources on their side, you'll be able to get it done quicker. You can allocate less resources to the testing yourself. And also you can get instant feedback on the tests and the integration. All of these together lead to unprecedented scalability of the solution. You can see what, through automation, you can see what the product looks like on the right-hand side here, but the guys will talk more about that later on. So for anyone who's familiar with Cellusys, they may have heard us say that we're an engineering-led company. So this means that we focus on solving technical challenges through the use of technologies and methodologies that are around us. So this presents its own problems in the forms of a thing called technical debt. When we are constantly evolving, and our software is constantly undergoing evolution, we can introduce issues along the way. So, technical debt is the implied cost incurred when businesses do not fix problems that will affect them in the future. Gone blank here. So pretty much we have to be able to evaluate what we have at any point in time. So as we don't... So as we're making software, we have to be careful not to introduce issues. Technical debt arises when we rush into implementing changes and we introduce bugs. So your code base can end up looking a bit scrambled. It's to do with quality control. And we can see here on the left-hand side of the diagram what this might look like for our own project, where there's kind of interconnected arrows going everywhere. It's a bit unclear what is actually happening when you can go through the process of revision, refactoring. And you can end up with a cleaner solution like it's on the right-hand side, where there's inputs and outputs, and it's easier to follow. So, with 5G testing coming up on the horizon, we think now is a great time where we could possibly reevaluate how we do testing. So what processes have we in place currently, and can we improve them? So how can we pay off this technical debt that we've accumulated over the last few years of our testing and service launch process? So now is a great time to rethink and redesign our solution. Thank you.
So Stephen basically mentions, at any moment in engineering, you essentially decide, do we tack on this new requirement to how we've always done it, or do we do it a different way? And logically, you might imagine we are going to advocate for a different way. We're going to advocate for redesign and rethinking how things are done. This was designed, ultimately, we're following a process designed maybe 30 years ago, and technology evolves, requirements evolve, we need to evolve with it. We can't keep doing things the same way. So we would advocate a rethink on how we do roaming testing, and automation should be at the heart of this. So automation really, APIs are the key to automation. The telco industry, the trend is towards APIs in general, not just telcos, pretty much every industry does the same thing. Even if you take 5G, taking a very specific example in telco, the entire 5G interfaces are designed using methodologies or common practices that are API-driven from the wider industry. 5G itself, all the specs are in open API format, for example. We're embracing this, and we need to embrace it further. We see things like the Open Gateway Initiative, and it's clear that telcos obviously see the value in exposing more of their network to APIs. And with RoamBot, we essentially want to expand on this. We need to expose more capabilities by API. Anything that's done manually, we always have the question, can this be automated? Can an API call do the job of a human here? And with RoamBot, basically for automated roaming testing, we're advocating that we expose more and we build an end-to-end automated testing process with APIs. Automation requires some level of upfront investment. You have to build the API, but you build it once and you reap the reward. we ultimately see that there's going to be a huge payoff from automating these things. We conservatively estimate that if you automate the entire process, you can reduce the testing effort by 90%. And now is the time to invest. We have to invest, and if we're going to do it, now is the time. We're about to embark on this huge global undertaking to launch 5G standalone roaming across the globe. And the payoff is there. If we do this upfront and do it right, this doesn't need to be a stressful situation. We talked yesterday about how roaming teams are scaling down. Are we going to scale them back up for 5G, or do we make an investment once and reap the benefits? So if you think how long it takes today to do some kind of roaming service launch, the amount of time, the amount of resources, the amount of people required, what if we could do that one engineer instead can launch 200 services in 3 months, for example? That's a pretty compelling business case. Stephen mentioned the parallel to technical debt. So we approach everything from an engineering focus. We're always looking for an engineering solution. And there's another interesting parallel here. And in engineering, if you're doing the same thing over and over, you're doing it wrong. If you do it repeatedly, you should be automating it. That's, if Stephen committed code that was copy and pasted, it wouldn't be accepted. He has to do it once, he has to do it right. So roaming testing is a very, very repetitive process, which means it's absolutely perfect for automation. So with RoamBot here, you'll see the tech spec exchange, so the IR21 data ultimately is uploaded to the system once. An integration with something like RayX would probably make sense here as well, of course. Like AA14 from the billing spec, that's uploaded once. It's, again, not something you have to exchange with every partner. It's the same thing that goes everywhere, so you upload it once to the platform. The testing, so what tests do I do when I'm testing outbound roaming service? What tests do we want to exchange? We configure that once. When I do 5G outbound roaming, these are the tests I want to tick off. When it comes to, let's say, the one-to-one relationship I want to launch specifically with this other operator over here, the data implementation itself, so we have to add IMSIs or routing onto STPs, DEAs, SEPs to enable the test to complete. Again, a human does this today. It doesn't need to be. That can be automated. That should be an API call that adds that configuration in. IREG testing, the other presentations covered this to some extent, but through like a multiplexer and probe type solution, you can automate the actual usage. You can simulate the usage needed for IREG testing. Again, fully automated. TADIC testing, you use API calls to retrieve the billing data, and you validate against the test that you've done. The SIM card exchange doesn't need to be done between every network. Instead, that can be done once. You send the SIM cards to the centralized platform and reuse them across all the different roaming test scenarios you have. Even things when something goes wrong, troubleshooting, APIs can help us there as well. So with an API, ultimately, it didn't work. Can I get diagnostic information from the other network? Can I debug this myself to some level without requiring the resources of the other network? Introduce some independence in how I launch roaming with somebody else. And even the commercial launch itself, again, is just more API calls. I need to enable this technically, do it on a particular date. Contract document management, you can't really automate very easily, but you could manage it through the same platform. So if we look at RoamBot then, the solution we're proposing, we'll see at the bottom there the two main components, the RoamBot application and the multiplex. So RoamBot is the thing that you as an operator would integrate with. You configure and load your data into RoamBot, and it's essentially an API coordinator. So when we do roaming testing, it will ask the network, hey, configure these test sims so they're allowed to use data here for testing. And that's where the API endpoint. That API endpoint comes in to each network. Every network on RoamBot has an API endpoint, implementing standardized APIs from RoamBot. For example, I want to enable testing for these two IMSIs for voice or SMS. Now, obviously, every network is different. So behind the scenes on your network, how you implement or the back end of that API call is up to you. You're going to have different vendors. You're going to have different setups. How you implement the back end of that is up to you. But ultimately, we see from RoamBot to the API endpoint is totally standardized, which means it can scale. No matter what network you have, what their setup is, what vendors they use, RoamBot can talk to them all, and how they implement behind that is up to them. The final part then obviously is the usage itself. So this is where the test sims will be loaded into the multiplexer, and when we're testing, we do it automatically through the test probe. But with this setup, the operator ultimately has what they need to do if they want to be part of this. They sign up, load their details to RoamBot, send their test sims, install the probe, and most importantly, implement the API endpoint. And when we scale that to multiple networks, we see here what it looks like. RoamBot talks to the standard APIs to say, hey, I want to test, I want to simulate some usage in this network. I want to implement routing. It handles everything that the human is doing through API calls.
So we talked a lot about API, so let's see what it looks like behind the scenes. So here we have an example of what an API call would look like. Here the call is to, RoamBot is requesting Ooredoo Kuwait to implement some test SUPIs or test IMSIs for, say, a 5G test. Then the API call will include some SEP and UPF information, such as the domain and the certificate. Lastly, the call, there's a callback URL or a reply to, if you prefer, so the API can confirm when the data configuration, for this example, has been confirmed. So from the user point of view, end user, so the folks in the mobile operators, RoamBot looks like a workflow tool where they can view the notification of any actions to perform, if any, because supposedly there's none of them. There's a dashboard, still you can view the progress of the launches that you have to do. And there's also, you can have a better view or more detailed view of the progress of your launches per countries and per network. So Dan mentioned earlier that you have to configure the tool once. So what it looks like, when you get on the tool, then you set all the inbound services you support, because that's useful. Indeed, the test sims are going to be used for outbound testing and some inbound testing test case scenario. For the IREC test book, which test you want to have been performed for outbound testing. And lastly, you will also upload the IR21 and IR14 that could be integrated with the RIECs. So here we have an example. We're going to go a bit more into detail into IR24 unilateral, where the Ooredoo is the home PMN. So in this example, RoamBot will ask the two APIs on the vPMN and the home PMN to implement the data for such a test. So for example, the test IMSI MGT translation in vPMN MSC VLR, the home PMN information in a STP and the billing configuration, and the same at the home PMN side. The RoamBot will ask the home PMN to whitelist the SIM card in the signal roaming, configure the HLR for roaming, and also implementation of the data in STP. And of course, RoamBot is 5G oriented. So what we saw, it was an example that I think everyone understood. Here, it's looking at the future of 5G. So the same will apply for 5G. RoamBot is asking both networks to implement, to be configured for the testing. And once completed, both APIs will reply to RoamBot that the configuration has been done. So if we look at what it would be for a tester to have the test end-to-end, well, here in this example, Ooredoo will want to test with Vodafone Ireland, so they request the test. And here on the other side, so then RoamBot takes over, automation takes over. So RoamBot is asking for the API of the vPMN to implement the test UPs. In the AMF, the SEP UPF information of the home PMN certificates, then it's being confirmed. Then RoamBot will do the same on the home PMN, asking the test UPs to be implemented or for roaming, information in the SEP and UPF of the certificates of the vPMN, and then it's being confirmed. Then RoamBot can go for the testing. So it will request the probe to do an attach. So probe will attach, signaling goes to the AMF, the SEP, N32 interface, and then back to the home UDM, and then the probe can confirm it's being attached. Then RoamBot can go further and will check the status of the test UP in the HLR, or sorry, UDM, or also in AMF to validate that the status is properly attached in the vPMN from the network point of view as well. And the same will apply also for, let's say, a data testing. So once again, RoamBot is asking the probe to do internet browsing, so traffic goes over the AMF, the UPF, and then we have generation of the CDRs. Then it goes over the N9 interface, and then also generation of CDR at the home PMN. Then RoamBot will go and fetch those CDRs. So it can be directly in the billing system of the operator, or it can go on the DCH. So it fetches the CDRs at the vPMN, and then also at the home PMN. So it can go even further than just the standard static validation. Just can validate the CDR generated directly by the network and complete for TCC evaluation. And then when it's completed, operators just launch because the tests are deemed valid, and then both sides agreed. So we here have some steps where we still see people clicking, but those tests can be still automated furthermore. So RoamBot is more than just accelerating the launches. We see that it can go further. With the API integration, it can be used for revision assurance, service assurance, for repeating testing. It can be used to fetch traces, logs, and then the settings of RoamBot will allow operators to control what is automatically validated or not. So, and we can also blacklist or whitelist networks, and further integration with a third-party data management tool for IREC, TCC, CLL management. So one scenario we can think of, it's if we consider two people can do 200 tests in 1 year, those same people can be used to integrate with API, maybe unless the operator is already on the GSMA Open Gateway initiative. That means that those two people, we believe that can do in 5 weeks 200 tests, so which is a return on investment of less than 18 months. But essentially, RoamBot is what the future of telco should be about: API and automation. So it's easy for operators to implement regardless of their size. Even just one operator using it is going to save time, because why? They're going to use it for inbound testing and inbound data configuration. We believe it's relatively low cost because it's just the API integration, hosting a probe, and some service fees. And then, as I said, accelerating your launch is just one of the use cases. We're talking about recurrent testing if need be. It can be for automation of fetching the logs, troubleshooting, getting traces, validating the profile of the SIM card from the HLRs. All those things that we always need to ask the operator, can you check the configuration? Can you check that? So this can be done through a RoamBot. So essentially, RoamBot is embracing API and automation and helping operators to face 5G and future challenges.
Great, thank you. Are the judges ready with their questions, or do they need a few seconds to absorb what's been said? Oh.
First, and again, I do welcome more players in the field of automated testing. I think we are now paying the price in terms of money and in terms of lack of innovation, of having too little competition in that field. So thank you. My second comment is, I don't know what to tell you, but my ambition is to get rid of a lot of these tests. So it's not a kind thing to say, but I can't avoid it. Instead, I think there's a lot of money to be made in the quality testing after launch. After launch, I mean. I renew the challenge. Why don't we get rid of some of this testing? Because we will be testing a very specific scenario. In our case, I think it's even in a very specific non-representative tariff plan, which is called the testing tariff plan. So why don't we get rid of some of that and we start reviewing the charging model on the quality control testing, so that operators can afford testing, like instead of testing one SIM card in one VLR in an outbound destination, they can test like 10 SIM cards, which represents different retail offers and different tariff plans in different VLRs in a destination and in more destinations, because the current offers are still limited in terms of which countries are covered. As a general comment, I would like to say that there's incremental innovation and there's radical innovation, and I think we are still in the incremental innovation page. We are not running, we are not walking, we are crawling in terms of innovation as far as mobile operators are concerned in this field. And I think we have been discussing a lot of how to crawl faster instead of how to get up and start running. That's my 5 cents or 2 cents. I never say how, I never know how to tell it.
So just to comment, so if you don't want to do any test, I mean, that's fine. RoamBot can be used to don't perform any test. And actually, and the beauty of RoamBot is that if you do 1 test or 5 tests, it doesn't change anything. It's still the bot doing it for you. So why not take the advantage of that? But as we say, like, we see RoamBot and this interfacing with APIs of operators with a local probe for just much more than just roaming launches. We see that it can actually be used for QoS testing. So there's always a limitation of, indeed, as you said, you test into 1 VLR. So that's a limitation that technically, currently we don't manage to overcome. But I'll be the first one to be able to have repetitive QoS testing to enforce SLAs in the roaming scenario, which I think is where the value should be as well.
Okay, and I have some questions. First question, I saw that you are supporting 5G testing. So just a question, this is 5G NSA or also you are supporting 5G SA? This is the first question. Second question regarding the testing validation. For the operator, I must be your customer for DCH, or you can integrate with my DCH for the validation of testing. This second question. Third question related to the same for the cost model. So is it CapEx, OpEx? Is it per service or per operator charging? So we need to elaborate more on the costing model for the solution. And last question, if I need to test with a certain operator, as far as I see, me as operator X and operator Y, both of us must be already integrated on your solution, so to be able to run the test. This is right or not?
Yeah, so let me try and take them one at a time. The 5G angle, right? So 5G, there isn't really a standard test book today, let's say, and you know if you've launched it. So that's, a little bit aspirational, but the point is really that whatever testing we do agree to do for 5G, we can standardize and automate. You know, we haven't gone down that road yet. This is where the opportunity lies to automate upfront and make sure that when we do, whatever testing we agree is appropriate for 5G should be automated. As to the question of like the accessibility to the system, it's all about the API endpoint you see on the screen there. So anybody who's part of the RoamBot ecosystem has to have this API endpoint. And when you talk about billing validation, for example, a standard call from RoamBot will be like, hey, I need to get the billing information for these specific SUPIs that I'm testing with. And it gets it back and validates it. So it's all that API endpoint. So there's no like, decentralized platform is just a coordinator. But to be part of this, you need to implement those endpoints on your network. That is the cost you have to bear. But again, the benefit being the automation and the scale you get from that. Cost, yeah, okay, so cost then, this platform doesn't exist today, right? So this is, again, it's a hackathon. This is how we see it being solved from an engineering point of view. But that said, it's not a particularly heavy model, right? RoamBot is just, it's not a heavy data processing system. It's just an API coordinator. So ultimately, it's very light. It's a cloud-based solution. It doesn't need a lot to host it because it's not doing heavy processing. And then when it comes to the actual, let's say, testing probe, we're not advocating any specific vendor. We're more advocating the solution is to use a testing probe. But again, that doesn't have to be particularly costly. It can be cost effective. The only real cost apart from the probe would be just, let's say, us maintaining the platform, which again, we don't have large hosting costs on a system so basic. So we would be looking at something like a monthly fee to be part of the system. Now, the other thing, as Charles kind of mentioned, there's value in this even. You don't need the entire industry to buy in. Let's imagine your network says, I'm on RoamBot, I've implemented the interfaces. Somebody wants to test 5G in my network. You say, right, well, then you're not going to talk to my engineer, you're going to talk to RoamBot. You use the platform, you take care of the testing into my network, and no headache for you. Make it their responsibility, let them test themselves, they're the ones who want to test for you. And you've just replaced your manual test effort with API calls and bots. So, that's the model we're going for. Did I get all your questions?
So this is just a concept, right? at this stage. And then the testing probe would be part of the solution, or the operators need to buy the probe from somebody else? How does it work?
Ultimately, because RoamBot has to coordinate the testing, right? So it has to be a standard interface. So what makes sense would be a common probe. The multiplexer in the central system has to be able to communicate with the probe. So that means that ultimately building the solution means selecting a vendor for that, ultimately. I don't really see that we can have a central multiplexer and you have a probe from like 2 different vendors. It's hard to standardize that. So we would imagine this ultimately being that, when you sign up, part of that is you're bearing the cost of the probe. You have to install the probe. It's a probe that we provide because we know we can do the relevant testing with it. So again, that's kind of a standardized interface, so you'd have to go with the same solution as everybody else.
Regarding the standard APIs, because there are different vendors for the 5G standalone core networks, is that something that you are going to drive in GSMA in that task force to standardize APIs for these specific actions on the core network, on the API calls, or how are we planning to address that?
So let's take an example. We want to launch 5G testing, right? From the example Charles gave. That communication from RoamBot to the API endpoint is standard, right? So whatever information we share, from RoamBot to say, I want to do 5G testing, here's the relevant certificates, here's the relevant SUPIs, or whatever it might be, that has to be agreed and standardized. So RoamBot, whether it's talking to your network or talking to a network over another part of the world with different SEP vendors, different 5G core networks, it doesn't matter. It's talking the same language to the API endpoint. On your network, how your API behind the scenes integrates with your core network is up to you. I mean, there's no way, it basically will never work if we have to rely on integrating with every single 5G vendor. We have to ultimately make a standard interface to every network and leave it up to the networks themselves to then say, right, well, what capabilities does my SEP have? Does it have an API capability I can leverage? Is it REST? Is it SOAP? Do I need to do, some kind of even more manual file transfer? Who knows? But that's up to you.
Okay, so that part that is beyond the API endpoint is something that the operators need to manage with their vendors, right? To agree on.
Yeah.
With the vendors of the core network.
Exactly, because every network is different, and there's no way to scale without us limiting the scope to ultimately this. We talk this language. How you implement it is your responsibility.
Yeah, just wanted to understand what is going to be the split of. Work. No, I think it's a brilliant idea. To be honest, it's something that we need, especially in the 5G standalone, where more automation is expected, also from the network perspective, not just from the testing and so on. So I think it makes a lot of sense as the core networks are going to be ready for this type of setup. So.
Yeah, and just to add on that, I mean, I think. Again, like the concept ultimately applies to any type of testing, right? Again, it's kind of really simple. What do I do today? Is it the same thing over and over? Can like a machine do this for me? The answer is probably yes. But if you take something like you try to apply this to like, let's say, traditional voice and SMS IR24 testing, reality is your STP is not going to have an API probably. It's not really going to work. But we're only putting in 5G networks now. APIs should be part of that. And we're still at a point where if they're not, we can reasonably say to vendors, you should have an API to configure this. We want to automate. So we can still drive requirements on 5G, which is why that's the area to target here especially.
Understood. Okay, thank you.
Any questions, comments from the audience? We've got Stuart, and after that, Lars. Stuart over there.
I appreciate I'm probably not going to understand the answer to this question, but one of the things that strikes me is it's crazy operators exchanging SIM cards for testing. If you guys are using signaling, can you not just emulate a SIM roaming onto a network?
Give that man a T-shirt.
That's the right answer.
Yeah, that's what he wants. Maybe, I mean, ultimately, Stuart, we take testing today, where you do any kind of remote testing, traditionally relies on this type of multiplex probe solution. So we're not rocking the boat on that too much. I mean, in the end, the magic of the solution really is the API endpoint and the coordination. So how you generate usage on the network, that could be done in multiple ways. Like you say, maybe there's a way you can do that in a different way that doesn't require something as complex as the solution. But in the end, the requirement is to generate usage that reflects a real user. And how you achieve that, I think, is up for debate. Like, perhaps the solution could be improved or simplified with that. But we've just gone with something that I think the industry understands and the industry knows. Again, maybe we're a little bit revolutionary in our approach here, but some level of incremental innovation was also, I think, quite welcome.
I'm hanging on to the microphone because I also wanted to make an observation, which is talk about crawling and instead of running. It strikes me it's also mad that everything is done on a bilateral basis, when so much of the roaming stuff is common, right? You have common standardized agreements. All you're negotiating really is pricing, interest rates, things of that nature. You need some kind of speed dating site where you can just upload your requirements and go and pick your partners.
I mean, that's what we're trying to do as much as possible here. I mean, and you are right. I mean, even, you said earlier about, like, ideally, can we do no testing? It would have been a very short presentation if that was our solution. But maybe that's the best solution. No investment, nothing. But if we're going to do something, if we insist we need to test, it should be automated. We need to take the human script out of this.
Lars? Lars, and then I have Pedro there, and then the gentleman down there. Okay. Over there, Lars.
Yeah, you just confirmed that the API endpoint, that's really the key in this suggestion here. And I also see that if you have this API on the operator side, which basically means that every time the configuration must be correct. So if the endpoint reports back and say, now the configuration is done, why just go and have fun, meaning that you open by default? Then you don't need the testing. I mean, if this is done the right way, you can eliminate all the testing and we'll open by default as soon as we have done the configuration. And that could be a common point where the configuration parameters and so on was collected. So I think that actually take away the lower box and focus on the API.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately that's a question of your confidence in your developers. If they do it right, absolutely, it's just going to work. API does it, job's done, it's going to work.
It's just to test if the configuration is done correctly.
Yeah. And you're right, because ultimately, like anything new, there's going to be problems the first time, but you fix them, and then they shouldn't really exist again. And, when you're doing roaming testing or roaming service launch, for example, you're doing the same thing over and over with different numbers. That's basically all that's different. Yeah. And that means that if you do it right for one, conceptually, of course, it works for everyone, right? I mean, and again, leverage the APIs. If you take that approach of, let's say, an optimistic launch approach, you could do that. And ultimately, again, the API still has power here. If it doesn't work, what can I learn through the API? Can I get a trace of my own subscriber from one of your systems? Can I independently troubleshoot on your network, without needing your people to reply to me? No matter what way you slice and dice it, which parts we do, which parts we don't, the API is still the key. You can opt in or opt out or take any part of that, but the API is the key. Remove the human element where it's repetitive and just let the API do it. Yeah.
It should just be a part of the new standards that all the vendors have to comply with this. So when you have 6G, that will be a requirement that you have this kind of interfaces.
And that's a very forward-looking approach, which is correct, because, I said about the investment for 5G, but the investment now, I mean, if we don't do it this way or we do it the way we always have, 6G, we're going to be in the same conversation in like 6 or 7 years' time and say, no, I have no roaming resources, how am I going to launch 6G? So it is the long-term play. It's at some point we have to do something, and we would argue that now is the time.
Yeah, just do it.
So
Just do it or don't do it.
We've loaded up Jason with all the T-shirts. Looks like many ideas coming up. If I could ask the gentleman here first, in the meanwhile, if you can get the microphone across to Pedro as well. Go ahead, please. Pedro, do you mind raising your thing so the lady knows? Yeah. Yeah, it's on.
Yeah, I think it's...
sorry, Pedro, one second. The gentleman, and then after you.
Mine is more of a comment or a suggestion. Here I see that someone could be capable to fully automate testing processes. On the other side, there is a request to not do testing or reduce it considerably. Now, I believe that you need to put together the two ideas. Certainly, stopping testing, it will not bring you far. But if you fully automate the testing and then do some human artificial intelligence analysis on the test that always pass, then you can reduce and go to further testing or automate other testing in the live environment. But the testing automation is a need. You cannot take it away. Then if you automate the testing, then you could reduce a lot the tests or change the testing scope going where you need the real testing to happen. It will be a saving at the end, but you need to look at the overall picture.
Thank you. Please, yes, of course.
Yeah, maybe I did not explain my vision well. Indeed, it is clear that we cannot get rid of testing as a whole, especially when 5G standalone is in the horizon. But there are services where testing could be reduced significantly, and it's already being reduced. A lot of operators are already agreeing to no test 5G launches. So that's something which is already there. On non-standalone, of course. Yeah.
Even further, you can reduce unilaterally the amount of testing that you do, because with the test automation tool, you see that statistically, those tests don't bring any value add. Okay, so that's the testing automation advantage. And at that point, maybe you will come to drastic decisions that could be unbelievable. So to reduce so much that you say, well, why do we do testing? But you will see at the same time that you will move to other tests. You will test something else, like all the new stuff, for sure.
Great. So when I was little, I was much taller, and I used to play basketball. And I always wanted to do this, so I'm going to try this. Please do not laugh if there's an epic fail here. Here we go! Oh! Anyway, Pedro, over to you.
Very smart solution, and I think it's all the hackathon is about. It's to bring new ideas, and we are here in the end to challenge it. I see a big challenge that it's about the network security. To try to put a bot messing up with a network can be challenging. So what's your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, we are in the security space as well as roaming. And in reality, you know, it's about exposure, right? So the more you open up by API, you're creating new potential weaknesses. Everything you open is a new weakness. So there's no denying there's a risk there from what you open up. It's just a case of doing it right. You know, it's the usual of like, what's the minimum I need to open up? How exposed am I? Have I designed this well? I mean, in the end of the day, you know, RoamBot's not going to ask for anything too complicated. But how you implement your endpoint, the operator, they need to do that with some thought and some care. You know, you can't carelessly just say, oh, open up anything, configure anything on my STP. You know, there has to be some level of control. But I would say that it's hard for us to mandate that. You know, we will not, the 8 standard APIs we would use will be minimum in terms of we need exactly this. But it is the operator responsibility to do that well. If you implement that very poorly, then yeah, maybe you are opening up weaknesses in your network. That is consideration you have to have when you open up anything.
Okay, thank you.
Just behind you, if you could pass the microphone to Johannes.
Maybe just to comment on what you both guys said. So I think actually that the API can also be increasing security. Well, because what we are seeing in terms of network configurations, for example, if you do it manually, what happens is people just open up a whole range because it's just easier to put in one big range than putting in 1,000 specific IPs, for example. If you do it via API, the effort is the same. It's just bing, it's there. So you can be much more precise also if you do it by API with less effort. So that's also an argument against actually that and can help with security actually.
Yeah, very nice point.
And you have glasses in front of you. And sorry, there we go. Skyhook. Here he comes. Oh, too much. Sorry, just behind over there.
Yeah, hi guys. So one question now, you have integrated everything with the API endpoints, right? Consider this, most of the places, I think predominantly where we test, consider it as a prepaid market. So in case you have provision everything, right? HLR barring remote that this is going to be tested with this VPN and everything is fine, the probes are set, you're going to load the SIM cards and you're supposed to test. Billing information is set in terms of how we want to charge it. In case the balance of the SIMs, right? This is the most common issue that everyone faces when you do anti-IREG and TEDIC testing or anything, right? The SIM cards are loaded, people start doing tests and then they feel that the balance was not there on the SIM card, profile and everything was fine. So does the RoamBot also indicate this as a request being raised or a recommendation towards the team via any notification channel saying like, you know, the SIM card needs to be loaded because you have requested, say, XYZ test, and this is what the charge amount is going to be.
When Charles showed the API earlier, can I find it? You know, that callback URL, you know, the result of a test, I've configured something, does it work? I've asked to do a test, does it work? You know, I think there's scope here. Ultimately, like I said, this solution is a concept at this stage. And ultimately, the quality of feedback we get can be defined, you know, so when something fails, how much diagnostic information do I get back? If it says, for example, I tried to test and it failed, maybe that's what it says. Or maybe it says I failed because I didn't have enough credit or I didn't have, or something was misaligned. So I think with this type of solution, I think those types of conversations this is the time to have it. You know, how good of a feedback can we get? When something goes wrong, do I need to contact either operator or do I get enough information to solve this myself? So I think it's a valid point. Ultimately, the point is about failure and diagnostics. So we can define that in terms of what we expect the operator to give us back in the event of a test failure.
Perfect. So just to add on that, see, most units that the operators buy often, right, from any of the providers, they are being charged. And the most common issues even we face while we see this in market is people don't want to do a balance query before starting a test, because that's a unit spend and they run across 2,000 or 3,000 tests just on completing everything, right? IREG and the GRQs of the world. So if this is something which you add on, this makes more significant in terms of, you know, you giving more intelligence prior than initiating a test and then automating the rest part of it.
I think that's, I mean, to be honest, that's to be defined, I think. Ultimately, you know, these are the real world challenges. In the end, you know, we're a steering of roaming, signaling firewall vendor. We know a lot about the roaming business, but, you know, we don't necessarily face the day-to-days on this. So I think those are the types of challenges you bring that, it's, you know, when we really, if you brought this solution to like reality, those are the type of things we need to discuss. So right now, I don't have a good answer for that. But it might get you a t-shirt though, so it's all good.
Sorry, can we have the microphone down here for Bruno, please?
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, it's a comment and maybe a suggestion. So it's quite you know, impressive to see your presentation and the previous ones, to be honest, because just from memory, we have had joint task forces with the GSMA for a number of years on testing and interoperability, and these don't come very often. Just from memory, I know there is the TAP testing toolkit. We have REX for automated information exchange. Now you mentioned the APIs for 5G. So I think there is a SWOT of tools that the industry believes that are solving the problem, but looks like they aren't. And maybe some backwards compatibility with LTE is also needed. So have you considered bringing some of these thoughts also to an industry forum and try, to converge more on the standards perspective and the API work for LTE? And then maybe to Jason and would you guys consider converging this feedback and liaising with GSMA, with the WBA, so we could probably try to provide some input?
Sure. Absolutely. And in the end, we don't necessarily benefit. Like this is us taking our engineering hat and saying, we see a problem, this is how we would solve it from an engineering point of view, like we always do. So for us, like if operators are interested, we would absolutely run with this. In the end, it's the operator's going to benefit. If somebody says, hey, my network, we want to do this, we want to be part of this, we would absolutely participate. Ultimately, it needs operator sponsorship, operator backing to be viable. But if it is, we would happily run with this. We'd happily build this, and we discuss what the requirements are, how we can build it effectively, how we can make it viable.
Any other questions? Oh, we've got a competitor asking a question. You don't get a T-shirt unless you come up with a valid idea.
No, I'm more for collaborator and competitor. I think the solution is brilliant in terms of we've got a data API built at Pix also, and if we can collaborate on this to address this opportunity. The idea here is to bring the cost down for the operator. If you've got a bot which can help process that, and we can add the other tools in terms of contract management, static testing, it can have the solution which is more, I think, commercially viable to the operator. So we need to collaborate on this, and that's what the option is. And a great presentation. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. Anything else from anyone else? Any new ideas? Well, thank you very much. Brilliant.